We're back with another Raymond Carver. So much water, so close to home, coming up for discussion today.
So little time.
Honestly, I don't know how you feel about this one, but maybe it's just been a while since we've read Carver, but this whole dirty realism, it hit differently to me this time. That I think for me, and it's kind of weird to say you enjoy a story based on like so much mistrust or the dark thoughts behind it. But I think there's a lot to discuss today, and I'm hoping that we have a good conversation on this.
There's a lot going on, jam-packed into 8-ish pages or so. I don't know if that's correct. You get hit up in the feels a lot of different ways. He doesn't pull any punches. A great little story. Not a lot of character development, but a lot of character emotions, and I was there for it.
I think the way Carver writes, it's kind of like sometimes he lets the reader fill in so much of the gap that your own life experience kind of like the way you interpret it tells you so much about yourself. And I've noticed that, I think, with some of like our readings of this, and even like Ray Bradbury to an extent. Sometimes we project things onto these characters that when I go back and really look at the words, like you can find you end up in hot water real quick. Example, I did listen to like one of those like 2-3 minute plot summary recap videos. It played after the audiobook on YouTube. And it was just like, it started out explaining the plot where it's just like, the man comes home and doesn't like his wife's dinner. And I'm like, wait a minute. It never said that he didn't like the dinner. Like, it never said like a lot of that, like it's so easy to get quickly in trouble with projecting onto it, I guess is the point I'm getting to.
I agree with that. I think that for me, one of the things I latched onto that I felt myself getting a little bit of trouble with, and I talked to my wife about this, was the whole story, and I read it twice actually. The whole story, the first time I read it, I felt it was all about trust. Trust. And then she and I kind of have a conversation about it. And I was getting confirmation bias. And then I read it a second time thinking, okay, what if I pull trust out of my train of thought? What can I glean from this story? What is Carver trying to tell me? What do I want from this story as well? Because that first go through, it was all about, does she trust him? Does he trust her? And as I was talking to my wife, we started talking about the different levels of trust, in that you can have trust with money. You can have trust with taking care of the children. You can have trust, being faithful. There's so many different layers to trust as well. And that was one thing that I didn't want to fixate on. But it's definitely there of how much in this relationship do they trust one another.
And you can, I assume, gather there's a lack of trust based on the non-forthcoming attitude of both characters. Like, it's almost like they're both dancing around, like, don't pick up that phone, right? It's probably this and this. And you feel like that's not the real reason, right? Like, there's probably some ulterior motive. And the way that she kind of, like, is slinking off to the funeral and not telling him about what's going on when she gets stopped by the car. Like, there's almost like they hide the main motive a lot of times. And I think that's Carver's excellent writing, but I also think that's very human nature, where it's like we give each other clues, but don't give each other the map sometimes, I guess, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I also think that a lot of the characterization of these two, there is this dehumanization that Carver, to me, introduced into the story of the murder victim, and just how it's kind of the only person that cares is Claire. Everybody else she's just another dead person.
Yeah, it's like her verse. It's like her verse. Like, am I caring too much? Like, why doesn't anyone else seem to care? Is kind of like one way to look at it. But let's stick with that incident, right? So the story revolves around the husband has told his wife the story that him and the boys went on this weekend trip of sorts, and they found a dead body. I think it was in the river. And they're like, okay, we were drinking. It's too late. It's only like 5 miles to the car, but they're like, we'll handle it tomorrow or whatever. And then they sleep And the next day they wake up, they drink again, they go fishing. I think it was like they do stuff. It's like a whole nother day goes by drinking whiskey again. Like no intent of like getting this lady, the dead body back to the authorities. Like almost like putting themselves at the, what do they call that? Like criminal negligence? No, that's not the term. Where like they could be charged with potentially like tampering with like the body scene, like the death scene of the death, the scene of the crime. Like theoretically, like the woman's family could be looking for them. Like there's a lot of charges I feel like that could be brought to them to spend a whole nother day with the dudes. And then like they come back later and like, he's like, again, not saying the main motive. He just says, you know, she was dead. What were we going to do? And like, there's a ton you could do because that whole circumstance was very unsettling and odd to hear because it's not what a typical person would probably do.
For me, I don't know if this was the route to go, but it almost feels like it's under empathetic to over empathetic. Not under empathetic, unempathetic at all. The guys are being the guys. They're just out doing their thing, and then the wife is almost dramatizing it. And I feel like any rational person, you come across a dead body, like obviously this was written a long time ago, but you get your phone out and you immediately call the authorities. None of them rush back to the car. They go on their camping. They continue with their camping trip, their boys' trip out. It just, wow. And I guess that's where the rut of the relationship for me is, because these two obviously have issues beyond where we're thrust in the middle of their marriage, the middle of their story. There's so much more going on that we get to fill in the blanks, like you said before, of what is really going on between these two, besides all the food over and over again. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time.
He does not like her dinner. Here's something that my wife has told me before, because she's like really into these like murder, mystery, crime shows where they're like doing real crime investigations. And she told me once, because like she always it's always women. Maybe it's because like, I don't know why my wife likes those. If you know in the comments down below, let me know. But she says like there's this one victim that said she's more likely, like if she's lost in the woods. Okay, this is a female talking. She's more likely to trust a bear than a man in the woods. And that just kind of like struck home with me, and it made me think like we have this social contract where we give up certain freedoms to live in a society, right? Like we have to pay taxes, we have to not murder. Like there's certain things you can't do in the social contract that you give up for things like militia control, police, fire departments, like public service type stuffs, right? Well, these men are outside of that, kind of like not really legally, right? But in the woods, it's kind of anything goes in some regards. And they're operating under this different license, right? Like, well, she's already dead. There's nothing we need to do. Like they're not operating in the license of what they're expected to do, what society would expect them to do. It becomes almost carnalistic, like what they think is best for them and what would satisfy their desires. And I imagine there's some darker elements to people that if you got lost in the woods, not this exact scenario, right? That there are probably darker things that you would do that you didn't think you were capable of when your back's to the wall, right? Their back's not at the wall, but they're already turning into some of those darker things that they probably wouldn't do if their wives were on that trip with them, or if the police station was just down the road. Like there's something about being in the woods and that like not trusting the man, trusting the bear before the man.
I think to add on to that, if you look at the story of just the relationship of the husband and the wife, that's one thing. But then it's added on to the fact that he's not out there by himself. He's out there with his buddies. He's out there with his friends. And then later in the story, she decides to go to the funeral, even though she doesn't know the dead lady. And on the way there, she's harassed by a man. So it's very evident, I think, that they're painting men in a negative picture here in this story. And it kind of brings me back to my idea of the dehumanization overarching of the story, that these men don't care about the dead woman, and that I don't know if they care about women at all, if they don't see them as people. So I don't know if you want to get into it now, but I feel like that the sexualization of the story is also very paramount. It's very front and center, at least from my interpretation of it.
Well, tell me what you mean. The way, like, I was kind of struggling with some of that just made me feel kind of awful. So you talked about her being harassed by the man. Again, a difficult word choice there, because like, men are typically viewed, again, very broad statement here, as the pursuers, right? And they put themselves in this aggressive situation that sometimes women play keep away, right? Obviously, she's not, right? But you could almost view him as aggressively pursuing her, right? And of course, if he likes her, he's going to look at her the way the male eyes are going to look at a woman.
Yeah, I mean, it's alluded to, I guess, very open to interpretation, that he's trying to force. This is a random man that is trying to force his way into her car. It just doesn't feel like you ever force your way into somebody's car with good intentions. Again, open to interpretation. But I think also in the story, between the husband and wife, when he comes home, there's a point where he wakes her up in the middle of the night to have some alone time.
When he says, I know what you need.
Yeah, and it just it feels so impersonal, and it feels like he is just, and again, husband and wife, they're husband and wife. They do their thing, but it almost feels like he is just viewing her as an object. And then when she comes back from the funeral at the end of the story, they're like standing there in the kitchen is kind of how I'm imagining it. And she's all sad. And I just picture him kind of being sleazy, like from Wedding Crashers, like, oh yeah, funerals get him all riled up. And he like just starts like taking off her clothes. And it's just like, I don't know. I felt like there was a lot in the story that fixated on that to show the over objectification of women.
Do you think she was scared? Like, why'd she say anything?
I think we fall into habits, good or bad. I think that she has accepted this as her life. It is her husband. He's not beating her. We don't see any ill will. He's just not treating her gracefully. He's not treating her with a lot of different types of affection. I don't think so. It doesn't feel like it's a healthy relationship, but it doesn't feel like it is malicious either. It just feels complacent.
Yeah. There's another angle to bring up here too, which is what if they didn't just do camping? What if they didn't just cook and clean? What if there was more to what happened with that woman while she was there that weekend that he's not letting on to? And that's why he almost is gaslighting her of, what were we supposed to do? She was already dead. Like nothing happened, huh? And imagine how weird you would feel as the wife thinking that like there might be some of those suspicions. Obviously, Carver never writes directly those thoughts, but like he kind of like dances around all these elements that I guess you bring your own baggage. I've seen enough horror stories that I have these concerns of like, okay, well, that'd be the dark area. Like, he doesn't bring it up, but like that could be a possibility where she's terrified of.
Yeah.
The woman's almost like symbolic of not having a voice, right? Like you said earlier, like nobody seems to really care about this woman. The men pushing for this, the husband's kind of gaslight her, like, what did you expect us to do? And I know what you need, and the guy aggressively pulling her over, which I do think was aggressive. It's almost symbolic of women not having a voice in some sense.
I took two weird kind of thoughts of that traditional line of thought I think that you had as well, of maybe the wife has had trust issues in the past for infidelity. And now the whole town thinks they don't know what happened to this young lady, and they were reluctant to report this crime. It's all in the newspaper. And she's like, wow, I wonder, is my husband capable of something more devious? And I think that hurts her because there obviously might be some trust issues already. But then I kept thinking, is this going to be a twist to this story? And that's how my mind goes, because we're reading it so much later than when it was written, of, is the twist that she is the dead lady the whole time? I was waiting for some type of ghostly twist, and it never happened. But I kind of kept thinking to myself of like, what if she is the dead person in this story? And I don't know, it kind of got to me. I was trying to pull out some nuances to back up my thoughts, but there's obviously nothing really there in the story. But it would have been cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how I would have taken that, but I will say this. I think this is my new favorite Carver story. That's a weird thing to say because it made me feel uncomfortable, uneasy. At the same time, it's like a man writing a woman's point of view. Kind of like we don't really see how he never tells us how they feel. He never tells us exactly what they're thinking, but it did, I felt like, capture, I think, the male gaze, which I know it seems like it's like a loaded term. Like anytime I bring that up, there must have been something that happened with that word that hurt some people out there that I don't know about, but people get really riled up when you say that. I'm sorry, but he really captured something about how when you look at someone for what they are, I don't want to call them an object, but kind of that, it really demeans the human experience. And I think he captured that well in this story.
Definitely. Last thing I want to ask about is kind of the title, because I think that's an older phrase, or the phrase is taken literally from this story. Carver invented this verbiage. What is the significance of the water then? There seems to be water brought up a few different times, of the river and the washing the dishes and the cleansing. I was trying to glean something more from it. I was curious if you had any insights.
I hadn't put thought into it. I'm going to tell you off the cuff, I have never heard that term before too. Here's my gut reaction live. I think the water is like, it's dirty, right? Usually water's baptizing in a story, like it's a way of rebirth, a character being reborn. But instead it's sullied with the death and the dead body and like almost like the shame.
Tainted. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like there's so much stuff tainted so close to home that like replace the word water with the word like tainted or sullied. And now this woman's viewing that as her life. My own husband has like this darkness or this thing I don't trust or this dirtiness to him, and it's so close to home. Like I married him and I can't even say no to him. I don't feel comfortable talking to him about that sort of thing, and I just go with the flow. To me, it's kind of like that darkness that we have closer than we think.
Man, as I said in the beginning, this story, it's an emotional roller coaster, and definitely one of Carver's best stories that we've read so far, for sure.
It's a good one. I do like the way he lets us kind of like explore that darkness, that social contract element, the objectification versus the voicing versus the two different states and perspective. It's a great exploration. Let us know what other Carver stories we should read. I'll leave a playlist down below, as this is like, I think, our third or fourth Carver story. What should we read next for him? My name's been Una. Thank you for spending time with us today. Peace.
Peace.